My name is Lucy MacRobert and I work in what we would broadly call environmental conservation. I actually prefer the term wildlife conservation or nature conservation because I think that the environmental movement is this absolutely huge area that covers things like climate change and sustainability. What I do is all about wildlife, wild places, conservation happening on the ground. So there's a lot of species specific things, a lot of habitat specific work that I cover. And you'll be delighted to know, I heard there was a question on I'm not very good on science earlier. You'll be delighted to know that I am not a scientist, although lots of my colleagues are. So all of these jobs are jobs that you can do in the area of wildlife conservation. We've just seen a great video there about being a countryside ranger. That is one tiny part of what is required to make the wildlife conservation movement across the UK and across Scotland actually work. As you can see, we've got everything from CEO level all the way down to things like retail manager and cafe running and catering. In between that, there are all these different jobs that make the movement actually work. And you'll notice I keep saying movement because for me, conservation isn't just a job, it is a kind of way of life. People who do it are genuinely committed to the conservation of all of our environments. We are committed to the conservation of species, we care about habitats. So it's quite different from things like working directly with animals. This is far more about land management, about people engagement, and about genuinely trying to save the natural world. The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in Europe and indeed in the world. We have very few big mammals. Our bird populations are crashing. So everyone who works in wildlife conservation is trying to make a change for the better to save our natural environments. As you can see in here, we've got things like website, we've got things like fundraising, we've got things like management strategists, people who go into governments to help influence policy. We've got people who actually manage the land itself. So those people tend to be scientists and ecologists who manage nature reserves. And we have people who work in engagement and education as well. So it's a really broad spectrum. And essentially, if you care about the environment and you care about nature, this is a great area to get into because there is something for everybody, no matter what your skill set is. You do not have to be a biologist. You'll be delighted to know that I actually don't have any kind of qualification in biology. The best I got was, I think, double award science at GCSE, which was all I could do. And I was so bad at it that I dropped it. My education level is A levels were in maths, English and history, and my degree is in history. So you do not need to be a scientist to go into this unless you want to go into hardcore ecology. I also know all these kinds of people as well who would also call themselves conservationists. They're the people who actually own the land, the farmers, the landowners, the land managers, people like gamekeepers. There are journalists, there are photographers, there's bloggers, there's town planners, and I also know a chocolatier as well. She's also a model, and I feel that those two jobs ought to be mutually exclusive. But there you go. It just goes to show this massive people who care about wildlife conservation. There is something for everybody. All you have to do is from a starting point of knowing that you love nature, you're willing to take a big picture view on how to conserve it, and you're willing to put your skills to the best use to make a difference. So I specifically am what I call a wildlife storyteller, and that is a completely made up job title. I will go into the ins and outs of my own career path in a few minutes because I think that's a really good way of showing you the different progressions into the area. But essentially, I work in communications. I worked for the Wildlife Trust's UK office for 5 years as a communications manager. And this means that I am a nature writer and an author. I have a book published. I do a lot of copy editing, which means that I edit things like magazines. I do a lot of project management, setting up of campaigns. I do some public speaking and presenting to different groups, from little local environmental groups like bird groups all the way through to big national conferences. So there's a big spectrum there, and I also get to occasionally mess around on television or radio as well, which is lots of fun. I've done environmental education with the Rutland Osprey project, and I've also got to take part in some really great events as well. So it's a really kind of broad spectrum of things that I do, but essentially my entire role and my entire life almost is about communicating the wonder of the natural world to the biggest audience possible, so that I can inspire them to take action in their own lives to save it. So this is essentially what I do, broken down into different areas. I should mention at this point, I am freelance. I went freelance last year after about 7 years in professional conservation, and I did that because I'd had a baby, and the way I wanted to work and the kind of projects I wanted to work on for my own mental health, I thought were best done freelance, and I've been really lucky to have lots of support doing that. So I'm an author, I'm an editor. I edit the Suffolk Wildlife Trust magazine and the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust magazine. I do campaigns and projects management nationally for a number of different people, a number of different clients. I'm a researcher on books. I'm a digital communications consultant, again, either on a small level or on a big level. These projects can either take months and months, or it can be a little 2 or 3 day piece of work. I do voluntary projects as well, because I do believe in giving back to things that you care about. So I do a certain amount of work for free, and I also have to do self-promotion. That sounds a little narcissistic, I know, but actually when you're working freelance, a lot of it is making sure that your name is out there and people know that they can come to you for help and support. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that all of this does not add up to 100%, it adds up to 101%. And that is the one thing I would actually say, is that these kind of jobs do become more than a 35 to 40 hour a week lifestyle. They can take some time in the evenings, or they can take some time at weekends. And there is a little bit of an over-reliance sometimes of volunteers and voluntary work in the sector. That's just something to be aware of if you are going into this area. There is a difference between volunteering to improve your CV and volunteering because you care about it and because you care about the project, and your employer potentially taking advantage of a bit of free labour. So always make sure that the volunteering that you are doing makes you happy, makes you feel like you're giving back to something worthwhile, and adds to what you're doing. The moment that it's not doing that, it's not the right volunteering project for you. This is a little map of essentially where I've got to show you the breadth of different things that go into the kind of job that I do. Along the bottom, I've included all of the different skills that I've acquired in the past 7 or 8 years or so. And they're the skills that I either went into the roles with, or they're skills that I've developed over time. So things like teamwork, leadership, having to be very good at timekeeping when you're multitasking, having to be very hardworking, giving the right attention to detail, being confident enough to do public speaking, which is very scary the first few times you do it, but if you practice enough, it does become really fun. Having to be quite creative, and also having to be really empathetic. I think that's a skill that is really necessary if you want to work in environmental conservation. Basically, environmental conservation is based on the idea now anyway that we need to be better at working across a range of different people for nature to thrive. So that means we have to work with landowners who may not be interested in nature. We have to work with politicians. We have to work with businesses. And being empathetic and understanding what those people need and how we can come up with win-win solutions that benefit people and wildlife is an incredibly important skill. If you don't have empathy and you're not very good at working in that kind of way, this probably isn't the area for you. But if you are a naturally empathetic person, it can take you a long way in these kind of roles, almost as far as your education level or your voluntary experience. Having that right way of listening to people and finding solutions is incredibly important. So my education, as I've already touched on, I have a degree from the University of Nottingham, but I'm not educated beyond that. I know some people who've got masters and PhDs. I would say if you're going to do a master's or a PhD, make it incredibly specific to the job that you want to do. There's no point going and getting a PhD in ornithology if you want to work in communications. It won't get you anywhere, and you'll end up being overqualified. When I went through, it was GCSEs and A levels, and also at the same time I was a bar attendant at a pub locally, because I do think it's important to go beyond education and test your hand at various different things. After that, I did a number of different jobs over the course of 2 or 3 years, including a lot of writing. I was a columnist, and I started meddling in journalism a little bit. It was lots of fun. I was an education officer, which meant that I basically showed people ospreys for a summer, which was absolutely great. I was the researcher on Tony Juniper's book, and I also set up an organisation called A Focus on Nature, for which I was the creative director. This is an organisation designed at mentoring young people who want to work in conservation, so it's definitely worth looking up their website if you're interested in this. Following on from that, I was communications manager at the Wildlife Trusts for 5 years, doing this whole really varied range of work. At the same time, I wrote a book called 365 Days Wild. And beyond that, I have gone freelance, taking all of these skills, all of this work, and turning it into a role that really works for me at the age of 30. As you can also see, I'm a naturalist and a birder. I genuinely care about wildlife. I love going out and watching wildlife, and it's a huge part of my life. So if you're planning on doing this area, what I would say is some application top tips. First of all, always read the description and all the supporting information. Some jobs may require you to travel quite a lot. They may require you to move around the country. And you want to make sure the job you're applying for is a job that genuinely suits what you are good at. As you've already seen, the breadth of jobs in this area is enormous. So make sure you do a job that you want to do. There's no point going into land management unless you're happy working in the wind and rain all year round for not very much money, because it's not the best paid of the areas. The suit and tie conservation, which is the desk-based stuff, working with politicians, working with engagement, working at a higher strategy level, whilst far more restrictive and far more closely managed, so it has its own set of frustrations, tends to be more professional. When you're writing your application, make sure you're relevant to the skill set and the job level. This is incredibly important. You don't want to be overqualified for a job, but you don't want to be underqualified either. It's a really fine line, so make sure you check the pay grade that you're going into, and be very careful if they say competitive salary. That's a top tip. I think some organizations are a bit sneaky and they say competitive salary and they wait for you to name your salary. Try and avoid jobs like that, or push them up front if you're really interested in the role into what bracket they're actually talking about. You don't want to be really highly skilled and end up doing a job that actually someone else could be doing much lower than you. Do push yourself in this industry. There are opportunities to move up. There are opportunities to move forward. Voluntary experience does count as much as education, in my experience. A lot of organizations are still asking for a degree. However, with recent pushes to diversify the industry, this is actually starting to fade away. A lot of organizations are now moving away from a degree as being absolutely relevant, and they are putting as much emphasis now on voluntary experience. And I think this is amazing, actually. I think degrees are incredibly relevant to some of the roles that we need to do, but in other ones, things like apprenticeships and better training at college level are just as important. Voluntary experience is great because you can do it anywhere, again, depending on your skill set. You can go and volunteer on a nature reserve, doing practical land management, or you could volunteer in a cafe, or you could volunteer to help out with their social media or writing blogs for an organization. There's absolutely loads you can do, and there's lots of exciting opportunities. When you're writing your application, back up your experience with examples of what you've done, and those examples start right at a college level or even a school level. So make sure you've got a whole range of those to show what you've done, and there's loads of opportunities to develop things on your own as well. So having an active social media presence that's very professional, tweeting about nature, doing Instagram posts about nature, volunteering with organizations to do that kind of thing is a really good little top tip, because it will just mean that they might be aware of you before you apply. And do check your spelling and grammar. These applications tend to be very popular. I once had 120 applications for 2 roles that I was advertising. So making sure that we have the best processes, and even just things like in a communications role, I need to know that I can trust you with spelling and grammar in written communications, and that kind of thing does actually count for a lot. So get someone to proofread your applications. Your interview top tips. This is provided you've got down to the top 8 out of those 120 applications. You want to dress smartly but appropriately for that job. You don't need 4-inch heels if you are going to work in land management, but at the same time, don't turn up in khaki trousers and trainers if you want to work in suit and tie. Assume that your interviewers know nothing about anything. This is something I've seen quite a lot when I've interviewed people, is they've made quite big assumptions about what people are actually doing, and they assume that they've heard of you or your work. Make sure that you're prepared to do things on Zoom as well, and have examples of your own work. Research your employer, that's really important. Where are they based? Are you going to have to travel? Do you get accommodation included in remote or rural areas? And try and come armed with a question or two that you want to ask them. Finally, even in a Zoom situation, sit upright, mind your body language, and make eye contact if you can. Now, as I've already said, I'm freelance. So just to wrap up, I've only gone freelance at the age of 30. It's quite common for people who work in this industry to want to go freelance straight away. And you can do it, but just some things to consider. Income is very sporadic. So you can go from earning not much money one month, lots of money in the next month, and vice versa. It's not necessarily stable the whole way through. You're going to need some contacts to get yourself off the ground, and you're going to get training opportunities if you go and work professionally for 2 or 3 years as well that will upskill you. It's a highly competitive industry. There are lots of people out there doing the same kind of thing. So make sure you've got plenty of contacts and skills that you want to give to someone. Make sure you are desirable in that respect. You have to be very good at time management and very disciplined. You need somewhere professional to actually work, a desk space. You're going to have to do your own finances and self-assessment, which I hate with a passion. And you're going to need to do lots and lots of different kinds of jobs. If you're interested in that, this is a great way of working, but just make sure that you've considered all of that before you make the jump to go freelance. Personally, I would work professionally for 3 or 4 years, build up your experience, build up your contacts, and then make the jump to freelance in your 30s. Thank you very much. That's my email address and my social media handles. If you want to get in contact or ask me any questions outside of this, I'm more than happy to answer questions or chat on Instagram or chat on Twitter, whatever works for you. Thank you.